Hello, Scoopta here with another fxhash tutorial. We're going to be making some generative art with fxhash, kind of running through some examples of how to use the software, I guess. So let's try and keep this short and sweet. I just want to quickly say thanks to everyone who showed support on the last video. I really appreciate it. I was pretty blown away by how much everyone liked it, so that's why we're making this one. So yeah, if you find this stuff helpful, please like the video, subscribe, share it with a friend, and check me out on fxhash. It's scoopta. And if you subscribe and comment down below that you subscribed with your Tezos wallet address, I will send you a free NFT. Sound good? Alright, so to start off, I'm just going to go into my text editor and make a file, call it sketch.js. And that's where I'm going to put all the code for my project. Just going to keep it simple, all in one file for this. So yeah, save that in the public file of the boilerplate thingamajig. And yeah, you're good to go. But I'm also going to be using the library called p5.js, so you need to download that from the internet and include that in the public folder as well. So basically just go to p5js.org, go to the left side, it says download. You just download it from there. If you have no experience with p5.js, that's fine. You don't even need to use it. It's just what I choose to use. And it is very good for beginners, but if you're just getting introduced, I'd recommend checking out the Coding Train on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description to their channel, but they have great tutorials, so definitely recommend looking at what they have to offer. So when you include p5.js library in your project, you basically just need the p5.min.js file. So you can just download that. In this video that you're seeing, I actually just download the complete library, but you don't actually even need that stuff, depending on what you're doing. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, once you have that downloaded, you're just going to drag the p5.min file into the public folder of your project. So in this step, I'm just copying some stuff from the template that p5.js gives you. So I'm going into their sketch.js file and copying the setup and draw functions and just pasting it in. You don't need to do this, I'm just doing it because I'm being lazy. I'm also going into the index.html file from the template, copying the line that includes the script that you're writing, and I'm just pasting that into the index.html in the project, in the public folder of your project. So yeah, now I'm going to boot up the localhost thingamajig. Not exactly sure what it's even called, but yeah. So that makes editing a lot easier, so that every time you press save, it just refreshes. Alright, cool. So now everything's all set up. We got our library, we got our sketch file. So let's just go in the sketch file, create a canvas 500 by 500 pixels, set the background to black, and as you can see, it didn't work for some reason. So I'm going to go into the browser, right click, go to inspect, and then I can use the console to see any errors. And it says that canvas is not a function. That's because you're supposed to write create canvas. So go in and fix that, and should work. Alright, we got our canvas. It's just a black blank canvas. So now, you know, the world is your oyster. Do whatever you want with it. But yeah, no, the video doesn't end there. Let's just keep it going, see what we can come up with. Oh yeah, so if you go into the style.css file in the public folder, you know, you can go in and change, for example, this light blue background. If you want to make it white, if you want to make it black, you know, whatever works best for your project. I'm just making it gray, whatever. Now that everything's all set up, I'm going to go ahead and start by drawing a line across the center of the canvas by setting up two vertices, one on either side of the screen. And then I'm going to change the stroke color to white so you can see it. So now that I have this line drawn, I'm going to change it into a sine wave. And to do so, I'm going to create a for loop that iterates across the page from left to right. And I'm going to set up a variable called num to choose the amount of points that the for loop goes through. I'm also going to change the size of the canvas to make it easier for y'all to see. So with the for loop all set up, I'm going to change the y component of the vertex to incorporate a sine wave. So I'm going to add that to the height over 2 so that it stays in the middle of the page. And I'm going to multiply it by 50 to change the amplitude. And I don't really like how it's filled in, so I'm going to go ahead and put no fill. So now I have my sine wave all set up. If I want to change the number of points that I'm using, I can go ahead and just change that variable up top. And that looks kind of weird, so I'm going to actually change the period now that I have more of these points. So I'm going to do that inside of the sine function. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and make a variable called period and use fxrand to select it. So when I multiply fxrand by 10, that gives me a number between 0 and 10. And when I put that inside of the math.floor function, that's going to round it down to the nearest integer. So it will be an integer between 0 and 9, including 9. So now that is a randomized part of my code. So that's one way you can implement fxrand to create generative artwork. And I'm going to try and walk you through some other ways that I also use it. You might notice here that I'm adding 1 to the period, and that's just because I don't want it to be 0, so it doesn't mess up when I divide by it. And I'm actually going to change the variable called num to make it called points, because I want to have a different variable called num so that I can use that to manipulate the number of sine waves that are shown on the screen. And so I want to have that be randomly decided as well. So I'm going to have another for loop, and I'm just going to put everything that I've done inside of that for loop. So now I'm going to use this new for loop to run through my sine drawing function as many times as I want. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to change the y value of my vertex according to whatever the variable j is currently at. And with that being said, it took me a minute to figure out how to do it, so I'm just going to speed that up and show you what I ended up with. So now that I have that running smoothly, I'm going to go ahead and have the num variable be decided by fxrand, and I'm just going to have it for now choose a value between 10 and 15. And yeah, so that seems good for now, but I can always change it later if I don't like it. I'm now going to create a variable for the amplitude named amp, and I'm going to set it to fxrand and multiply by 100. So that will give me a number between 0 and 100. And that could work for for some cases, but I'm actually going to do something else in this case. I'm just going to go ahead and set amp to fxrand, so that's a number between 0 and 1, and then use an if statement. With the if statement, I'm going to evaluate and check if amplitude is less than 0.5. I'm going to set it to 10, and if it's not, I'm going to set it to 50. So there's two options for what the amplitude can be, each with a 50% chance. And you can set as many options as you want using else if statements, and you can manipulate the probabilities accordingly depending on what value you choose for your inequalities. Another thing you could use fxrand for is color, or in this case, the shade of gray that the lines are. So I could go into the stroke function and multiply by fxrand so that each time the line is drawn, it's a random shade of gray. I'm going to set it to no loop though to make it look less spastic for now, so you can kind of get the idea of how something like that might work. And I'm actually just going to set it to different levels of red for this. So that might give you an idea of how to manipulate colors with fxrand. I'm just going to take that out for now, that'll keep it more simple, and just set everything to red. Depending on what you're trying to create, you might not want to do this, but I generally like animating my designs, so I'm going to go into the sine function and add frameCount so that we'll make all the lines move as time goes on. I don't like how fast it's moving right now, So I'm going to do some messing around with the frame count by dividing it by different numbers. If you divide it by a bigger number, it will move slower. You can also, manipulate the speed based on if the line is near the top or near the bottom. You could even manipulate the speed randomly for each line, using fxrand. Now that I've got the speed in a spot that I'm cool with, I'm just kind of messing around here with some different things, like putting the sine function to the power of different exponents. I could manipulate those exponents using fxrand, but I chose not to here. I'm also just messing with the B value in the RGB color, multiplying that by fxrand, but I ended up not really liking that, so I just didn't end up going with it. I've sped this part up a lot because I'm just messing around, making it so the top lines move opposite to the bottom lines, and just messing around with the sine and cosine function. One thing you may have seen in other fxhash projects is features or attributes on the tokens, and so if you want to incorporate that into your project, it's pretty simple. You're just going to have to go into the src subfolder of the webpack boilerplate folder and open up the index.js file. In that file, there's a few lines saying window.fxhashFeatures, background, number of lines, yada yada yada. So go ahead and uncomment those out, and now you have features set up in your project. But you're probably going to want to change them to incorporate, what you've done in your code. So here I'm just setting up a line in the container so that I can view right above my canvas what my feature is currently set to during that iteration. So right now I'm just using that default black background feature, but I'm going to change that to my period, and I don't want to have period as a string here. I want to be referencing the variable that's in my code. So now you can see that's useful for troubleshooting to see if your features are working properly. So what I'm doing here next is messing with the color of my project using fxrand. It took a while to troubleshoot, so I sped it up a lot here, and to be honest, it's not really that relevant to what this video is even about. But if you want to see what I did, you can look at the code, which I'll have down in the description. With that being said, I want to show you guys one more way that I use fxrand in my projects. This is kind of the way I use it for most things now at this point, and that's to use objects. So what I'm going to use for an example here is the stroke color. So I'm going to go and make a variable named stroke, and I'm going to make it an object. And I'm going to give that object various properties. One of the properties will be an array which holds the RGB values of the color itself for the stroke. Another would be the fxrand that decides what the stroke is eventually going to be. And lastly, I'm going to make a property in the object called name, and that's going to be what I'm using in my token features in the index.js file. So now I'm going to quickly hop over to that file and set up a little thingamajigger in order to see if my stroke feature is working. And with that set up, I can see that it is working, and I'm ready to start messing around with it. So I'm going to go into sketch.js and create a conditional statement. In the first if of the conditional statement, I'm going to set up an inequality using stroke.n and say that if the inequality is true, I'll change the stroke color to 0 and change the name accordingly. And I'm going to use a 50% chance for this. Then I'm going to make an else if statement to add to this and use a 25% chance by saying if stroke.n is greater than 0.75, then I'm going to do no stroke and change the stroke name to none. So then to implement this in my code, I'm going to go down into the draw function and create another conditional statement where I check what the value of stroke name is set to, and if it's not set to none, then I'm going to change the stroke to be stroke C, and if it is set to none, then I'm going to say no stroke. So now I want to show you guys how to make your canvas take up the entire screen. So first of all, we're going to set the width and height to window width and window height respectively. Then I'm going to go into index.js and comment out the document body prepend container line so that we don't see all those words at the top. So now that that's gone, I'm going to go into my style.css file and set the margin to 0. So now the drawing is taking up the entire window. But there's a few more tweaks I want to make. I want to make sure that it's always centered in the page. You can see that right now it's in the top left. So I'm going to add in justify content center and align items center to the style.css file. I'm also going to add in display flex. And so now you can see that the drawing is always in the middle. On fxhash, they recommend that your drawing always resize to fill up the window whenever the window is resized. So in order to do that, we're going to go into our sketch.js function or file and write a function that says window resized. And in that function, we're going to use the function resize canvas and change it to window width and window height. So whenever the window's resized, the canvas will update accordingly. So you might notice when I resize the window that the amplitude of the sine waves remains constant, causing it to look kind of weird at different resolutions and not always in proportion. So in order to handle something like that, you might need to do this for several different features in your project. And the way to handle this is by creating a new variable. I'm going to call it size in this example. So we're going to declare it at the top so it's global, and then in setup we're going to set it to window height over 1000, and we're also going to do that in window resized, so that way size is updated at the beginning and whenever the window is resized. So now that that's happening, we have size, which is setting up a proportion. So if, let's say, the height was 1000, size would equal 1. If the height was 2000, size would equal 2. So it's always proportional. I'm using the number 1000 here, which is totally arbitrary, and it's basically just a design choice you can make as the creator. So with size set up, we're just going to multiply by size when we're setting our y values. And now it's running smoothly and in proportion, so that's great. One thing that you should note is if you use strokes or lines in your drawing, you should definitely multiply the stroke weight by size, so that way if you're on a really high resolution device, the lines won't look super thin or anything like that. Once you're happy with your project, go ahead and open git bash where you're running the local environment and press Ctrl+C and then type npm run build, and that will zip up everything into the zip file that you need to use the fxhash sandbox. So your project.zip file is in the dist zipped folder. So that's it for this tutorial. If you guys need any more help, feel free to leave a comment or find me on Twitter or Discord, and I'll see what I can do to help you out. Thanks a lot for watching if you made it this far. Appreciate it if you guys would subscribe and throw me a like. Thank you. Scoopta out.